My sister's fiancé's going away party was today. As normal, my sister's car wasn't working, so we'd borrowed our mom's car to attend. At first, the party was fun, but then everything had gone wrong. Now we were on the road home hours late, traveling in bad driving conditions. And our phones were dead. So we couldn't call Mom and tell her we were okay. We knew she was freaking out, imagining the absolute worst. All of this was making my sister cry even more. I wasn't good with tears, so I was desperately going through Mom's glove box in search of a charging cable for the phones. One had to be in there because it seemed like Mom's glove box was filled with everything else. Napkins and car manuals, ketchup, and a massive flashlight with dead batteries were just a few of the items in there. I finally found a charging cord and held it up triumphantly. Then I frowned at the dash. Mom's car did not have a USB plug. My sister took her eyes off the road and reached for the glove box. "She has to have an adapter," she said. As her attention shifted from where we were going, we hit a puddle that was hiding a pothole big enough to swallow the passenger front tire. The steering wheel jerked in my sister's hand. Gravel sprayed, mud splattered the windshield, and the Jeep plunged off the road into the ditch. Tufts of grass exploded around us. I saw a thing, and there was a sickening thump noise as we ran over it. My sister gasped and twisted the wheel, and with more flying mud and grass, the Jeep miraculously climbed back up onto the road. We came to a stop sitting sideways across both lanes. My sister straightened the car out, pulled it onto the side of the road, and turned the engine off. "I just hit someone," she said, her voice full of horror. Then she opened her door and rushed away into the darkness. I opened my door and rushed after her. Rain plopped on my head and dripped down the back of my neck, zigzagging through all my neck hairs which were standing straight up. The ditch was dark and ankle-deep in mud. I squelched through it, the mud trying to suction the sneakers off my feet. I could hear my sister ahead of me. She'd followed our tracks back down into the ditch, and when I caught up to her she was staring at an ominous reddish stain, her eyes big, her face pale. Both of us looked from the stain to a trail of bent grass and more reddish stuff that led back into the black, seemingly impenetrable mass of trees. It occurred to me that it was a strange thing for a human, who had just been hit by a car, to do. To crawl off into the forest. My sister crouched and tried to peer into the trees. "Hello," she called, her voice faltering. We weren't prepared to search through the woods. We didn't even have a flashlight that worked. That's when we heard the sound, a low moan, almost indistinguishable from the wind. But it was a horrible sound, full of anguish. Immediately my sister hurried toward it, and terrified, I hurried after her. It was so dark in the trees we could barely see branches and fallen logs until we were tripping over them. We immediately lost the slight trail in the dark and fog. Finally we stopped, straining to hear. My whole body trembled as my mind insisted every dark shape was monstrous. "We need to go back," I whispered. "We won't be able to find the road again if we go farther." As I spoke, the rain stopped splattering and the clouds parted, letting the moon light up the landscape. We stood in a small clearing, and suddenly we could see something dark. As we watched, the thing seemed to stand up, then lie down, all without really moving. It was like its body melted into each new position. My sister took a hesitant step closer. I grabbed her shirt and held her back. We both stood there staring as the fog swirled and the thing kept shifting. It seemed to stand, then fall back down, go to its knees, then crouch on all fours. Get smaller, then bigger. Then bigger yet. A low moan rose from it. The same moan we'd heard earlier. Then the moan changed, grew deeper, lower, changed into a growl. The thing crawled to its feet, and the fog rolled away. It bared its teeth at us. My sister and I both screamed, turned, and ran for the Jeep, tree limbs smashing at our faces, down trees grabbing at our feet. Leaving the woods took scant seconds. My sister managed to beat me to the car by one stride. Which was good because she had a couple of strides farther to travel around the Jeep to the driver's door. I jumped in my side and slammed the passenger door shut and came face to face with the werewolf through the partially opened window. Time slowed down as it and I stared at each other. Blood oozed around its eye and matted in its fur. I sensed my sister jumping in on the driver's side and slamming her door shut. I screamed and then my sister screamed, there was a clunking sound, and then the werewolf tried to open my door. It couldn't because the clunking sound had been my sister hitting the master lock on her side that locked all the doors at once. My sister started the Jeep. The werewolf reached through the half-opened window. I watched the claws coming toward my face in slow motion, my hand grasping for any kind of weapon. It closed over Mom's flashlight. I slammed that down on the claws. The werewolf yelped, sounding like a hurt dog, and yanked its hand back. I hit the window power button, and the glass rolled up. The werewolf shook its hand, much like a human who'd just crushed their finger with a hammer. Then, also like a human, the werewolf pulled its other arm back, furious, obviously intending to smash its fist right through the glass. The Jeep lurched forward as my sister squashed the gas pedal to the floor. Mom's Jeep might have had the off-road power to muscle its way out of a ditch, but it did not have great acceleration. With my sister gripping the steering wheel so tightly all I could see were knucklebones, and with both of us staring horrified at the werewolf now running behind us, so close to the Jeep that it filled the rear window. Slowly. Ever so slowly. The Jeep climbed past 10 miles an hour, then 15, then gradually to 20. We felt it automatically shift gears, right as the werewolf caught up, swiping at the back hatch. At the gear shift, the Jeep lurched forward, gaining speed rapidly. 30 miles per hour, 35. 40. The werewolf did not fall behind. At 25 miles per hour it had stopped running on two legs and switched to all four, its eyes weirdly bright in the rearview mirror. At 45 miles per hour it finally started dropping back. At 50 miles per hour it swerved suddenly into the trees and disappeared. Shocked, we stared out the windows, but there was nothing to see. The clouds were clearing again. At the top of the next hill, we were bathed in moonlight and the landscape was bright, rolling ahead of us for miles. Then the road dipped down and fog rolled in again, and the dark trees loomed in on either side. The road we were on twisted around swampland, erratically changing course, or doubling back on itself to avoid the worst bits. The result? A confusing mess of curves and hairpin turns. My sister took the first few of them far too fast, nearly sending us flying into the cattails. Unwillingly she finally slowed us back to non-death levels. Both of us scanned the land around us, which sometimes was swirling in fog, sometimes was as clear as day under the bright moon. We were silent for a few more moments. Then my sister looked at me strangely. "I'm not hallucinating, am I?" she asked. "Did someone mess with my drink at the party? Did you see what I saw?" "Werewolf." My throat was tight, the word barely coming out of my lips. "So this is really happening?" "Werewolf," I screamed, pointing. The werewolf was lunging at us from the left, its expression lethal. It must have run a straight line from the top part of the road, through the swamp to where we were now. My sister screamed and swerved, gravel shooting out from under the tires. For a horrible instant the Jeep tilted, and I was certain we were going to roll into the ditch. Then somehow we were around the werewolf and barreling down the road. Fog closed back in, and we couldn't see anything. We careened around another bend and up and over another hill. Then we rounded a curve and suddenly the forest fell away, and the road straightened out. We both looked in the back mirror, and out the side windows. There was nothing. Fields opened up around us. The Jeep's tires hummed on the wet cement. And then, just as the forest faded from view behind us, something, a mere microdot, emerged from the woods. We both turned around and looked through the back windshield, but even the woods had disappeared. We looked at each other for a long instant, then my sister turned her eyes back to the road. The moon hung huge and low. From here it was a straight shot to our house. "We can't go home," my sister said. I stared at her in disbelief. "If it is still following us, we'd lead it straight to the house. You know, our house, no nearby neighbors, deep in the woods, guarded by a flimsy lock, and Mom with her aluminum baseball bat. My sister looked at me. I looked back. My sister stared at the road and was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We will go to that cafe at the truck stop. It is open 24 hours a day. There are always people there, so we should be safe. I think we can charge the phones at the tables. Then we can call Mom and figure out what to do." It was the only plan we could come up with. In the distance, our lonely mailbox came into view. We blew past it without slowing down. As we did, my heart plummeted. It was another 8 miles to the truck stop, and it was raining again when we arrived. The truck stop was built on the crossroads between the interstate and Highway 15, which was an artery that carried supplies to all the big towns near us. The road we had arrived on was a third, far less used back road. Mostly only us locals knew about it. I scanned the entire area for any sign of werewolves, or anything out of the ordinary, as my sister pulled the Jeep as close as she could to the doors of the cafe. We jumped out and ran inside, my sister taking a moment to lock the Jeep. It was past 2 in the morning, a shocking realization. Mom was going to be so angry. Despite the late hour, there were several people inside. Truckers sitting on the stools at the bar area. A few tables with 2 or 3 people at each. No one looked up at us. We slunk by and sat at a booth in the back by the window. A waitress appeared and we ordered coffee. Outside it continued raining, and small wisps of fog curled against the pavement. The waitress brought our coffee over. I gladly sipped mine. Adrenaline crash combined with the late hour left me exhausted. I sleepily looked out the window. Trucks droned by on the road, interspersed with a few cars. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I found a USB plug and connected my phone. Then I sat and stared at it, waiting for the 0% to crawl up to 1%. A man sat down next to me. "Sorry it took me so long. Being ran over makes me slower than normal," he said. I looked up from my phone at him, my jaw dropping open. We were sitting at a booth, so when he sat next to me, it positioned me between him and the wall. I had no way out of the seat other than crawling under the table to my sister's side. As I thought of doing that, he reached under the table and put his hand on my hand, which was resting on my knee. Only his wasn't a hand. Or, more correctly, his started out as a hand. Then I could feel it change, fingers turning to rough pads, like a dog's but more supple. The knuckles and the back of the hand grew fur. Sharp claws that kept getting longer and longer, dug lightly into my finger and knee. I felt wetness trickle. A quick glance down showed a wet, red stain forming on my jeans. When I looked back up, nothing else about the man had changed. He looked about my sister's age, like a normal man, a lot of wavy brown hair, dark eyes. Just another average clothes-wearing human. For a moment my sister and I were too shocked to say or do anything. We'd assumed we were safe because we were around other people. As we were sitting there stupefied, our waitress walked over. "Need anything, hun?" she asked the man, smiling. He smiled back, his teeth straight and even, no giant fangs showing. "Coffee, thank you," he said. Everything just seemed so normal. Outside, another semi pulled through the lot, having gotten diesel. It stopped for a moment, waiting for the traffic light to change to green, then chugged onto the highway and pulled away into the night. Inside the cafe, coffee cups clinked. People talked. No one stared. It would have been bizarre to scream, "Werewolf," while pointing at a perfectly normal-looking man. No one would have believed us. The man beside me was angry. I could feel the emotion humming through his body, tightening his muscles. He leaned forward, looking at my sister. "So why did you lose control of your car? You were driving drunk." "No. I don't drink," my sister said, her voice tiny. "You smell like you just came from a frat party," the werewolf said, his voice indicating he didn't believe her. "I can smell it all over your shirt." You were swerving all over the road, driving too fast for the conditions. Are you sure you weren't drinking? My sister's eyes were huge, her skin color going deathly pale. I looked at the man and saw that his eyes were changing into something terrifying. The color wasn't human and they glittered. No. I cried out. My sister is a good driver. She would never drink and drive. She only drank soda at the party. It was her stupid ex-fiancé that spilled what he was drinking all over her. He was waving his hands around claiming he was innocent and that everyone was lying. She wasn't drinking. It was just bad road conditions, and she had the worst day of her life. So you were distracted, the werewolf said to my sister, sitting back and his eyes, thankfully, becoming less intense. Do tell. I'm having a bad day myself. I want to hear what took so much attention that you didn't need to look at the road. I looked at my sister. She tried to remain composed, but despite the terror that we'd just gone through, despite the werewolf sitting across from her, the thought of her incredibly short engagement was too awful. She couldn't speak. Her boyfriend, I said, who was her best friend since the 2nd grade, and her boyfriend since the 9th grade is leaving for college across the country tomorrow. Yesterday he proposed to her. They made plans to marry after he graduated. They talked about houses, about the names of their future children. Today we went to his going-away party, and my sister showed off her engagement ring, and all of his friends suddenly became really uncomfortable. Turns out he'd been cheating with this other girl, who was part of the friend group. He denied all this, of course, but the girl got smashed when she saw my sister's engagement ring, and admitted everything. Otherwise, my sister would never have known. So your boyfriend was a jerk. So you put your sister's life and mine in danger driving crazy, the werewolf said, leaning toward my sister. I've been brokenhearted too. I've been under extreme stress. But I never endangered anyone because of it. The irony of that statement made me angry. His grip on my hand had loosened as he leaned toward my sister. I snatched my hand out from under his. No, you handle extreme stress so well, you go werewolf road rage crazy on people. People who actually stop to help. My sister gasped. When I'd pulled my hand away from the werewolf, I'd rested it on the table. Now the werewolf and I followed my sister's gaze down to my hand. It was covered in blood. Don't hurt her, my sister cried, looking up at the werewolf, tears starting to roll down her cheeks again. It was all my fault. She's just a kid. You are right, I shouldn't have been driving. Nothing that happened gave me the right to be a danger on the road. Please don't hurt her. The werewolf looked at me, then down at my hand, then back at me, his expression shocked. I reached down and grasped his paw and pulled it up into sight. The werewolf was so surprised he let me do this, although his paw rapidly morphed into a normal-looking man's hand as it pulled into view. He didn't hurt me, I showed my sister. That's his blood. I think I hurt him when I hit him with the flashlight. No, my sister said weakly, damage that bad happened when I ran him over. The waitress walked around the partition with the cup of coffee and put it in front of the man. Oh honey, she said, catching sight of the hand. You need to wrap that in a bandage. We have a first aid kit in the back. I'll go get it. The werewolf stared at his own hand. In all the shock and confrontation, it was obvious that he hadn't really examined his own wounds. His adrenaline had been running so high he probably hadn't realized how bad they were. His entire palm was slashed open in several places, some of the cuts so deep bones were visible. The waitress came back with gauze, bandages, and antiseptic. And a bowl of water to clean the hand. My sister had taken first aid courses and promptly helped, tears still rolling down her cheeks. With the waitress standing beside him, the werewolf was now blocked in between her and me. For a moment I saw him panic, his expression that of a trapped, wild animal, about to chew its own leg off to escape. I could feel his entire body tense and pulsate with adrenaline. Finally, as the waitress and my sister worked efficiently and gently, occasionally shooting him a kind smile, I slowly felt him relax. That will stop the bleeding, but you really should take that to the hospital for stitches, the waitress finally said, giving the bandage the last wrap. The werewolf mutely shook his head no. She discreetly left the tab and carried the first aid kit back to the kitchen. My sister left money for our coffee, including the werewolf's, and a huge tip. We all sat there awkwardly, the werewolf staring down at his bandages. Then he abruptly stood, staggering slightly. My sister jumped up too. Can we take you to the hospital? No, the werewolf said. He sounded exhausted. I asked, are you going to eat us? No, the werewolf said to both of us. Is there anything I can do? My sister asked. She was standing next to him, a full head shorter, her face turned up to his. The werewolf stood looking down at her. When he spoke, his voice was gruff, but softer. We've all terrified each other enough. Keep your car in its lane. Then he was gone through the door. When we looked out into the parking lot, he'd completely vanished. My phone rang. It was Mom. We walked to the Jeep as I assured her that, yes, we were safe.